We're currently doing 30 miles an hour and the speed limit here is unlimited. Oh, 80, 90, 100. Last week I asked the diving developer community for some questions for my first Q&A video. They all asked me questions about electric vehicles for some reason, so here they are, the top 10 electric vehicle questions. Nigel Clucas on Facebook asks, what are the benefits of owning an EV over an internal combustion engine vehicle? And he also asks what happens to the batteries when they need to get replaced. The main benefit of an electric vehicle is its low running costs and the convenience of charging anywhere there's a plug socket. This means that an EV can use electricity from loads of different types of sources, whether that be renewables such as solar, or wind or hydro, or from large power plant. Internal combustion engine vehicles use a refined petroleum product, which is extracted from beneath the ground, transported, refined in refineries that use tremendous amounts of electricity, and then it's delivered to a petrol station for pumping into vehicle tanks, where it's then burned inside an engine to produce a sort of kinetic movement energy, but also lots of heat and noise, and some pretty horrible byproducts of combustion from the tailpipe. Overall, this is a very inefficient process, and only a small percentage of the energy stored from the crude oil products actually makes its way to power the vehicle. The most energy-intensive part of this refinery process is the refining of liquid fossil fuels. Now, refining fossil fuels is a process that requires tremendous amounts of energy. Now, refineries are built next to power stations for this exact reason. The main difference with an electric vehicle is that it can be powered directly from the power station, as opposed to petrol diesel vehicles, fossil fuel powered vehicles, which have to be powered from the products of the refining process. Okay guys, so a lot of people have concerns over the longevity of batteries. Now, conventionally, the batteries we're used to are this sort of thing, you know, nickel cadmium or nickel metal hydride, or this sort of battery chemistry. And these batteries can only do so many hundred charge cycles before they're more or less redundant. They're worn out. Now, the difference between the sort of rechargeable batteries that you're used to and the type of rechargeable batteries that are in an electric car is that the batteries, when they're in an electric car, are in much higher quantities, which means they can be managed more easily. And there are complicated battery management systems which sit on top of the batteries, just to make sure that they're looked after really well, and make sure that they're being charged at an appropriate rate and so on. This means that battery packs can last an incredibly long time. In Cornwall, there was an electric vehicle taxi called Whizzy. Whizzy was a first generation Nissan Leaf. Whizzy was only rapid charged, and rapid charging is a type of charging which can be quite harmful to a battery. And after 100,000 miles, there was no noticeable degradation. In fact, Whizzy was sold on to its next owner, only needing a ball bearing replacement. Simon Quirk asks, what will people without driveways do to charge overnight? Now, of course, one of the big advantages of EV ownership is that if you can charge at home, you will always wake up to a full tank every morning. It's like having a petrol station on your driveway. But for those people who can't charge at home, or indeed off the street, they have four main options. The alternative options are charging at work, charging at an apartment, or charging using communal charging at your apartment, or off-street adaptations, so the use of charging tunnels or adaptations to existing road street furniture, or indeed the main one, which is rapid charging. Following this, Simon also asks, shouldn't we wait for hydrogen cars because they fill up instantly? Now, hydrogen cars. There are 9 filling stations in the UK at the time of speaking for a hydrogen vehicle. It costs about £70 to fill up an average sized tank with hydrogen. It does fill up in less time than it does a Tesla. However, the hydrogen that's available is currently brown hydrogen, which is eco-unfriendly. If they used green hydrogen, it would cost twice as much. It's fantastically more complicated than an electric vehicle, and therefore will have a potentially shorter lifespan and require more maintenance. Hydrogen's also properly dangerous, especially when it's compressed to over 700 atmospheres of pressure. So, look, just to summarise hydrogen, it does have all the disadvantages of a top-end, very complicated hybrid vehicle, and none of the advantages, except for perhaps super fast charging. Julie Bibby asks about cobalt in her question. Now, cobalt's a really interesting element. Cobalt is plentiful throughout the crust of the Earth, and it is essentially produced as a byproduct of copper mining. It is also used as a rare earth material inside batteries. Now, global demand for cobalt currently considerably outstrips the supply. The largest users of cobalt from cobalt mines, personal electronics. However, electric vehicles are catching up to them pretty quickly. Now, the problem with cobalt is that about 60% of the world's cobalt comes from a place in Africa called the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, it is known that children are sometimes used in these small artisanal mines. Of course, the vast majority of the cobalt doesn't come from these small artisanal mines, but some of it does. Now, not all batteries need cobalt. In fact, the current generation of Tesla batteries has no cobalt in it. The original Nissan Leaf battery has no cobalt in it. And of course, all the automakers are aware of the potential issues. Mercedes-Benz have a very complicated audit process. BMW use blockchain technology to verify the source of their cobalt. BMW, General Motors, Hyundai, Kia, Nissan, Toyota, Ford, VW, Mercedes-Benz are all working on solid-state batteries, which also don't need cobalt. Cobalt is used to desulfate fossil fuels. So a petrol car is actually burning cobalt as it runs. Question from Manx Mur. When owning an EV, should you own the car and lease the battery? I've never bought a new car and the most I've spent is 7k. Are EVs readily available, second-hand and worthwhile? So thank you for your question about second-hand cars. All new technologies start off quite expensive and the price drops. If you look here, here's a chart of the price of car batteries falling over time. The most expensive part of an electric car is in fact the battery, but perhaps the biggest problem we have is that the large automakers are moving their production from conventional vehicles to electric vehicles. Now, of course, as they're moving the production, they still need to sell their existing vehicles. The VW Corsa, for example, and the VW Corsa E, the EV version, they are considerably differently priced. The VW electric Corsa is much more expensive than the VW petrol Corsa, despite being more or less the same in terms of quality, range and so on. Manufacturers need to sell their existing cars. They can't just switch over to electric cars. So there is kind of a sliding scale point where automakers are starting to produce cheaper and cheaper electric cars over time, and more of them. Of course, it takes quite a few years for those brand new cars to become second-hand cars. So most of the second-hand electric cars that we see on the market today are the first gen and second gen Nissan Leafs. Those can be bought for around £7,000, but you might be best just waiting a couple of years for the prices to drop further. Don't forget though that there are a number of factors that go into how much a vehicle is. Now normally you might be thinking, hey, okay, this car is 3 years old, it's got 30,000 miles on it, it's worth this much. But there are a number of other factors too. So electric vehicles don't really need servicing. There's nothing to service. There's no gearbox, there's no drivetrain, there's no engine, there's no transmission. They're really simple vehicles at the heart of them. So you save on servicing costs. You typically save on insurance too. All the electric vehicles are typically newer cars, over the last 10 years. They all benefit from increased safety, they all benefit from increased safety and comfort sort of features that you would expect in modern vehicles, that perhaps you wouldn't find on a vehicle from 10 or more years ago, for example. For a relatively modern fuel-efficient diesel car that gets around 45 miles to the gallon, here on the Isle of Man, that will cost you about 15-16 pence a mile to run, whereas an electric vehicle is about 2, 3 or 4 pence a mile to run. So if you factor the running cost and the total cost of ownership of the electric vehicle, the significantly cheaper fuel, the cheaper insurance, the negligible servicing, and other maintenance costs, you might find that your £7,000 goes a little bit further than you thought. Mitch Gibson from Twitter asks a question about the total cost of ownership of an electric vehicle, and says that he feels that the value of the car is very much bound to the warranty due to the cost of the batteries. I'm not quite sure what you mean, Mitch. The electric vehicle batteries are significantly longer life now. We haven't, given that how new the technology is, for the premium modern electric vehicle that's under 5 years old, they typically haven't had problems with their batteries. This isn't something that we find that there's a problem, or that they deteriorate or degrade, or that there's some issue. Historically, manufacturers such as Renault, for example, would offer you a lease on your battery, so that if it needs a replacement, they'll come and swap it out. But you would be bound not only to your car, but to some maintenance agreement on your battery. That's completely not necessary. In fact, you'll often find the used Renault Zoes that are on the market, which have come about because they were originally sold under a hire purchase agreement, but also with this, £100 a month or whatever battery, warranty charge. Those are really unattractive now, because people used to be concerned that the battery would fail on them and would be sold these expensive warranty and maintenance lease, battery leases, where you wouldn't own the battery, you'd own the car but not the battery. And if there was a problem, you could swap the battery out. The batteries don't really fail, and you don't really need to swap them out, so what are you paying the maintenance for? Yeah, if you're buying a second-hand EV, avoid the battery leases. They're not needed, and they're not sold anymore. Wonder why. Nigel Clucas from Facebook asks, what happens to old batteries when they get replaced? Well, we don't have that many old batteries knocking around. There is a company in the Netherlands which reconditions old battery packs and fits them back to cars. Predominantly this is for the first generation Nissan Leaf. So if you want to get a larger battery pack, you can go to them. They've got bits of old batteries and they've made them, new again. You can refurbish batteries, is the point. All the chemicals that are inside a battery can be recovered, unlike the chemicals that are used and burnt up in fossil fuels. Whereas the cobalt that may or may not be in an electric vehicle battery is available to be reused. Typically, old lithium-ion battery packs are repurposed as home energy storage or power plant energy storage. Clint from Twitter asks, at what point in the future will EVs become the de facto choice of vehicle in regards to purchase costs and availability? Okay, so the first part of your question, Clint, well, more or less now really. If you're looking to purchase a company car, EVs have been a no-brainer option with their 0% benefit in kind and equivalent taxes worldwide for quite some time now. In terms of the running costs and the servicing costs, the total cost of ownership, if you factor that out in your Excel spreadsheet, you might find that it is significantly cheaper, or at least has broken even, than an equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle. In terms of availability, there are hundreds of EVs to choose from near enough every manufacturer, in every category, except for heavy goods vehicles. Should governments that are pushing for increased use of EVs, so that'll be using zero-emission vehicles to displace polluting vehicles, be mindful of the increasing costs of raw materials? I've had more people ask me about what's inside my Tesla Model 3 than what's inside my 10-year-old diesel Honda Accord. Literally nobody asked me what's inside my diesel Honda Accord. Materials are used to produce vehicles. You could say, looking at a zero-sum thing, that hey, maybe the greenest thing to do is to not have a car. Well, we live rurally. We not only live on an island in the middle of the sea, but we live in a really rural part of that island. Our nearest bus stop is 40 minutes walk away, down like a big long farm lane. So it's not that we can't have a vehicle. Now, if we're going to have a vehicle, we're going to have one that has zero local emissions, and that if it uses a fuel source that comes from fossil fuels, it's going to use that energy directly. It's not going to go from fossil fuels into a refinery, and then from a refinery onto a big wagon onto the island, and then from an island onto a petrol station, and then into a pump directly into the vehicle, and then burnt. We're going to be fuel station, EV. And hopefully in the future we'll be able to power our EV using solar panels like other owners do, and we can actually just generate that electricity locally and run our vehicle for free. Amanda Davidson asks, is there any conceivable way any currently owned ICE car can be converted or adapted into an EV car? She's asking about the conversion of internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles. Well, Amanda, the good news is yes, you can convert them, and people have been converting their favourite combustion vehicle into electric vehicles. The bad news is this is very niche and very expensive. In fact, there is a second consideration here. If you are purchasing an EV, there are broadly two types. There are the cars that were always designed as an electric vehicle, and then there were the cars designed as a petrol car, which have had the motor and fuel tank taken out, and an electric motor and a battery put in. So you're actually probably better off, in general, buying the cars that were designed from the ground up as EVs rather than the ones that were retrofitted. But there are a lot of people out there who have told me that they're waiting for a 500-mile range EV for less than 15,000. I've literally had that question asked more than once. There is this thing called the Osborne effect, which is this thought that you should never move on something until it's perfect, or that there's always going to be something better coming out next year. And this is always going to be true as technology progresses. However, it's better to make the move when you can, rather than continue to spend a fortune on fossil fuels, road tax and company car tax, and also taking a really big hit on the residual values of older types of car. Thank you to everyone who sent in a question for my first Q&A video on electric vehicles. If you'd like to see more electric vehicle content, let me know in the comments below. And in the meantime, stay safe. Bye for now.